I feel really humbled to be addressing this group of professionals. I am merely an amateur civil defense activist, and I'd like to thank some of the individuals in this room who have supplied us with credible, accurate information and helped us frame this issue so that we could intelligently debate individuals like Dr. Les Aspin in front of the University of Utah student body. I guess first of all we ought to start out with a little definition of who Mr. Aspin is. If you're not familiar with him, he was an 11-term congressman from the state of Wisconsin, and he's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and he became President Clinton's first defense secretary early in 1993, and was the Clinton cabinet, the first Clinton cabinet member to resign later that year. Last May, at the time of his death, he was leading the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board and was a professor of international policy at Marquette University in Wisconsin. We were among the last people to visit with Mr. Aspin before he died. We hope you don't think that anything like that is going to happen. Last March, he was sponsored by the Programs Committee as a guest speaker at the University of Utah. The general public was invited, but the audience consisted mainly of students from the political science department, most of which had very liberal leanings. Members of the Program Committee, however, wished to see an opposing viewpoint, and knowing of our interest in national security affairs, they gave Sharon and I a special invitation to attend this lecture, encouraging us to challenge any policy with which we took issue. At the end of his lecture, during the question and answer period, we took the opportunity to express our concerns to Mr. Aspin about national security policy. The head of the political science department is the former Salt Lake Mayor, Ted Wilson, who was a Democrat, ran for senator on the Democratic ticket. He introduced Mr. Aspin as one of the nation's most outstanding strategists and one of the greatest living minds on defense issues. We were soon to take issue with that claim. You have the transparencies? Since Sharon Packer took an excellent college course at the Brigham Young University on national security affairs, we're going to have her review some of the elements of his talk, and so you'll have a pretty clear idea of where we debated Mr. Aspin.
This gets complicated.
You might explain that first paragraph there.
The first paragraph you see here is, that's Paul and I, we're the disbelievers. And it was kind of fun to see that reported in the newspaper. Former Defense Secretary Les Aspin patiently and good-naturedly explained to a disbeliever there is no need to build bomb shelters anymore. I can get untangled here. You'll need that. He began his talk with the basic premise of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, that nuclear war is not survivable. He said, let's have that second one, Paul. He said, during the Cold War period, a full-scale nuclear war would possibly end life as we know it, and it would severely alter life on this planet, unquote. He talked briefly about our policy on arms control and non-proliferation. We know, of course, for the past 45 years, the overall bipartisan consensus on foreign and military policy was to have the following objectives. First, strategic nuclear deterrence. Now, we know that's not defense, but it means massive retaliation, arms control, and non-proliferation policy. Second, containment containing the expansion of communist ideological and political influence, and third, extended deterrence, which is deterrence of attack on our European allies by the Soviets or those supplied by the Soviets. But now, Les said, quote, and I'm reading this to you because we're putting this on tape, quote, "The evil empire is gone. The end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union took care of the global nuclear threat. All we have to worry about now is keeping nukes out of the hands of terrorists." Wouldn't it be nice if that's all we had to worry about? He continued to calm us and salve us with the assurance that all is well in Russia, and that our only concern was the new terrorist threat, and said, quote, "President Reagan correctly characterized the Soviet Union as an evil empire run by a bunch of thugs. But they were not crazy. They were sane, and they made rational decisions. I don't know that you could make the same claim about Saddam Hussein or the crowd running North Korea now." He said that the Russian conventional war machine was a thing of beauty and a masterpiece of organization, and that it was probably at the height of the Cold War, it was probably the best that the world had ever seen, and it is now no longer a threat, and it would take a long time for Russia to build it back to its former force. He failed to mention the fact that now Russia is a member of the UN and a hopeful member of NATO. They no longer need their conventional war machine, and that Russia's nuclear capability is still first rate. On that same note, isn't it interesting that Russia, our new friend and ally, supports NATO and the United Nations while she's supplying the Serbs who fight against NATO and the United Nations? If there's no enemy, then why do we have a war? Mr. Aspin continued, quote, "Nuclear annihilation has been averted for 4 decades by luck, some skill, and a combination of deterrence, arms control, and non-proliferation by the 2 superpowers. Now, if the nuclear threat is still viable, it must continue to be averted by these 5 concepts: luck, skill, deterrence, arms control, and non-proliferation." Well, he acknowledged a little later on that non-proliferation and arms control just wasn't working. And deterrence, of course, the threat of massive retaliation with our current rate of demilitarization is certainly not going to work. And judging from the current skill of the current administration in foreign policy, I think maybe all we have left is just poor dumb luck. Even so, Aspin said, we came closer than the public ever knew at the time to nuclear war. He said that there were a number of these crises. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was one such occasion. The opening of long secret records in Moscow indicates there were others. Les mentioned that the CIA assessment of these situations were terrible, that the satellite intelligence was good, but our analysis of the information was poor. For instance, in the Cuban crisis, we knew they had missiles in place, and we were considering a surgical strike against these missiles and trying to blockade any delivery of nuclear warheads. We failed to realize that Russia had already delivered the nuclear warheads, and a strike may have initiated a nuclear exchange. Now, speaking of disarmament, talking of the START II agreement, he said, quote, "But now the huge volume of nuclear weapons that once pointed across oceans will be reduced 80% when arms control treaties are fully implemented." And Paul certainly had some comments about this. And under pressure from the United States, South Africa, Taiwan, South Korea, Argentina, and Brazil have destroyed their nuclear bombs. Had time permitted, I would have asked, did they also destroy their understanding of the technology required to build, fuel, and deliver these weapons? He then said, quote, "The new threat is the handful of nuclear weapons that terrorist organizations might obtain. And here the old policy is not going to work. Deterrence works only if the other guy is rational. The new threat involves smuggling of nuclear material past borders and new delivery mechanisms the world has never seen before." I wonder if he was referring to the UPS. "You can take the nuclear capability needed to blow up New York City and carry it in a suitcase. Blow up New York City and carry it in a suitcase. They can just put it in a locker at Grand Central Station and go to Europe." Now, we took opportunity while we were here to visit with Dr. Conrad Chester and Ed York and and asked them about this, and they said that this weapon does in fact exist. There are suitcase-sized weapons. However, they estimated the yield of this weapon to be in the tens of tons, and maybe if 2 or 3 people were carrying this weapon, maybe 100 kilotons, but certainly nothing near the requirement to blow up the entire city of New York. In fact, it would take many weapons of our largest to do that. I was puzzled as to why Mr. Aspin would claim such a weapon with a yield that would totally blow up New York. There is no doubt that he'd have access to this information. The only conclusion I can draw is that he was either lying or trying to impress the audience, or he just didn't know what he was talking about. He continued, quote, "You can't strike back against a terrorist country because you don't know what country he came from. You can't work on arms control because the terrorist has only 1, 2, or a handful of bombs and isn't developing any new technologies. Non-proliferation is a problem because you have thousands of former Russian nuclear scientists who know how to build a bomb. They're out of work and available to go to Iraq, North Korea, or anywhere. With that expertise, they have ready technology and materials," unquote. Now, if you remember just a few paragraphs above, Les was consoling us with the fact that far fewer countries had this technology than we had feared. I think the more truthful statement would be that we just don't know who has the bomb. He continues, quote, "The Russian military is selling its equipment to feed its soldiers. Will they sell nuclear weapons? We hope not." Mr. Aspin suggested that there were 2 things the United States should do to meet the changing nuclear threat. First, I think there's a overhead for that, Paul. Draw from the political right and left some kind of strategic nuclear defense program. Not Star Wars, he stressed. For the bombs won't be coming via intercontinental missiles, but maybe some kind of anti-missile technology to shoot down a short-range missile like the one Saddam had in the Persian Gulf War, unquote. I wonder what he thought the Patriot was. Was he admitting that the Patriot was totally ineffective, or did he forget that we had it? He said, quote, "Think about this. What if Saddam had a couple of nuclear bombs before he invaded Kuwait? He couldn't have attacked New York or Washington with them, but he could have bombed Tel Aviv or Saudi Arabia or U.S. troops massed on his border," unquote. Well, why could Saddam not have attacked the U.S. with his nuclear bombs? Did he forget about the new delivery mechanisms the world had never seen before that he referred to earlier? And the second suggestion was, quote, "And we need to take from the political left the idea of no first strike. America won't start any nuclear exchange." It's interesting that he would give the political left credit for no first strike, since the only time we've used a nuclear weapon in wartime was with the very politically left President Truman. And I'd like to revert to his original hypotheses that the end of the Cold War took care of the nuclear threat from Russia, and that our new concern was the faceless nuclear terrorist. How could we strike first against an unknown terrorist country? We wouldn't know whom to strike. There seems to be great ambiguity in this administration's nuclear policy. And he went on to say, quote, "Would we have even entered that conflict knowing Saddam had nuclear weapons and he'd use them? Or would the world just have let him take Kuwait? Those are the tough questions in the new nuclear age." That statement alone should give us a clue to the mindset of the current administration. They would consider the very threat of nuclear extortion as a reason to capitulate against retaliation for an attack on an ally, even when they know the identity of the aggressor. Now let's look at that again. Would we even have entered the conflict knowing Saddam had nuclear weapons, he'd use them, or would the world just have let him take Kuwait? Should Saddam even threaten a nuclear attack, this current administration would consider their choices of retaliation under these circumstances to be very, very tough. And since we have neither missile nor civil defense any place in the continental United States, what about a threat against our own country by Russia or anyone else? It must surely be dealt with in a similar manner. Deterrence of this attack by the threat of massive retaliation, as poor as that option has been, is the only defense we ever had. Would he take this option away as well? He said the current national security objectives are, first of all, demilitarization and defense conversion. Second, democratization and regional self-determination. And third, economic reform and market liberalization. I don't personally define these as military objectives, but that was his definition of military objectives. He said the current administration perceives our threats as, first, regional instabilities and conflicts that could threaten vital U.S. interests, such as the Korean Peninsula, the Persian Gulf, the Balkans, Somalia, India, Pakistan. Second, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, MBC, and their delivery systems. Third, a weak domestic economy that could undermine U.S. influence and military power. He said, quote, America's economic strength is central to its security. Now maybe if our domestic economy would be, would be stronger if we stopped spending all of our wealth in fighting foreign wars. And fourth, instability in the former Soviet Union's independent nations, the internal threats to their establishment and stabilization. He stressed that nuclear war weapons by this administration are perceived to be irrelevant. They feel that global nuclear war is no longer a credible threat, and large nuclear forces on high alert are no longer needed. Therefore, this administration has canceled the small ICBM mobile missile, scaled back on Trident II, dramatically reduced nuclear arms, and has canceled our ballistic missile defense system, relegating it to long-term research and development effort. And the reason was very interesting. He gave for our current reductions in nuclear arms were, first, they failed to deter Saddam Hussein from invading Kuwait, and second, they played no role in the Persian Gulf conflict. He said the United States also cannot neglect its military. It's the best in the world, but it's always on the edge. You can destroy it in 6 months with an experience like Vietnam and then need a decade to build it back, unquote. Aspin said he would be careful about cutting defense budgets any further. Current funding is adequate, judging by the quality of people and the level of readiness. And this was early in his administration. At the end of Mr. Aspin's talk, several people formed a line at the back of the hall to ask questions, and I'll let Paul field his own questions. Whoops.
Sharon and I were sitting there in the auditorium right before it began and taking stock of the audience. We did not know at the time what Dr. Aspin was going to speak about, so we was hoping that it was something that we could comment on. And when he announced that the title of his talk was going to be "Will Nuclear Weapons Ever Threaten America?" I leaned over to Sharon and I said, "This is going to be good." Well, he concluded his remarks and basically paraphrase everything. We don't have to worry about Russia. The Russian threat's gone now. That's the word he used. So I wanted to hammer at that for a while. So when I stood up, I started off by asking him if he remembered the words of former Secretary of Defense Richard Cheney when he said that America must always base its defense planning upon a potential enemy's actual military capability and not upon our perception of whether or not he would actually use this capability. And he nodded his head in the affirmative and said, "Yes, absolutely." Then I asked him, is it not true that these tens of thousands of warheads that still sit in Russian silos that you say are no longer aimed at America can be re-aimed at America in between 3 and 5 minutes through a system known, I believe, as secondary targeting default? And he said, yes, that is true. I said, is it not also true that these deep cuts in the warhead numbers in both arsenals will not occur until the year 2003? He said, yes, that is true. And I said, is it not also true that even after these cuts have been implemented, the Russians will still retain the ability to successfully and redundantly attack and destroy the full spectrum of military, industrial, and economic targets throughout the United States in less than 30 minutes? More irritated, he responded, yes, that is correct. I said, well, sir, in light of these facts which you failed to touch on in your remarks, would your current assessment of the Russian nuclear threat be subject to any change if a Russian nationalist such as Vladimir Zhirinovsky suddenly assumed power in Russia? And he snapped, my assessment would change in 30 seconds. I said, well, sir, in light of all these facts that we've touched on, why has the U.S. government never provided effective civil defense for both the military and civilian populations of the United States? And afterward, I kind of wondered if he had read Fighting Chance by Arthur Robinson, because it's almost like he went through the book chapter by chapter. His first response is, well, the price tag was far too high, and the American people would never stomach the cost of a shelter system. I said, well, sir, we just budgeted $96 billion to deploy 442 advanced tactical fighters. I don't quite understand why we need the ATF, because after all, the F-15 Interceptor's kill rate, I think, is 96 to nothing, and I don't see a particular air superiority threat from Ethiopia or Venezuela. So why do we need the advanced tactical fighter for $96 billion, but we can't afford, the other? He said, well, even if we could afford it, the American people would never go for it. They don't think we need it. I said, well, maybe if you declassified some of this information and made the true nature of the threat apparent to the American people, maybe they'd be smart enough to figure out for themselves that maybe we do need a civil defense system, and they would support it. He said, well, assuming that's true, he said, if we build a shelters program, it would scare the Russians to the point where they might launch preemptively. I said, well, when they built their extensive shelter system, it didn't frighten us into striking them. So I don't see that, and after all, you did say that they were rational individuals. So, well, also we wanted to avoid frightening the American people. And I said, well, when I look at the people of China and Korea and Switzerland and Finland and many of the other countries who have deployed effective civil defense for their populations, I don't see them, in a particularly frightened state. Well, the last thing he groped for was, he said, it doesn't work. It just flat doesn't work. I said, well, sir, if it doesn't work, then why did you build hardened shelters for about 200,000 federal bureaucrats? And of course, the interesting thing about this exchange, and I kind of noticed out of the corner of my eye that as we were having this lively discussion, it kind of looked like the Wimbledon tennis match, because the people in the audience, were following the ball. And I could see that Les was getting very tired of my questions, and so I thanked him for his service to our country, and I sat down knowing that, and I think he was relieved to see me sit down, but he didn't know that Sharon Packer was standing right behind me. So I'm going to let Sharon articulate her questions and comments.
I made this observation and asked, Russia children receive 200 hours of instruction in civil defense skills before they graduate from high school. In view of your admission that the Russian threat still continues, why are our children not being educated in these very important civil defense skills? And he skirted this question and said, oh, they're not being educated anymore in those skills. By this statement, I assume he meant that our population's ignorance of life-saving skills is justified by Russians' population's ignorance. I then reminded him that he had acknowledged the failure of our intelligence during the Cuban crisis, and that during the political coup, when Gorbachev lost power, there was another intelligence failure. The general public was told that this political upheaval presented no danger to us. We learned months later that our intelligence had failed to recognize that the communist hardliners had, in fact, brought their strategic nuclear forces to ready status. And then I asked, what gives us any assurance that our current intelligence capability is any better now than it was then? Now, I didn't realize at this time that he was currently the head of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, and I'd insulted him. The question probably insulted him, for he gave no answer at all. But by this time, the students in the audience were kind of snickering and turning to look in our direction. And seeing their obvious enjoyment of the interchange, I got on a real roll and continued with my rather aggressive questioning. But what I didn't know is that my daughter, who is a junior at the University of Utah, who is normally very reserved, was standing on a chair 2 rows behind me, waving her hands and pointing at me and mouthing silently, "That's my mom." Well, it's no wonder the audience was amused, because it was rapidly becoming a circus. I commented that during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 mentioned earlier, President Kennedy went before the general public and alerted us of this crisis. Civil defense training was immediately started in our schools and on TV. Public shelter space was identified and location maps were distributed to the public. The shelters were stocked with water, food, medical supplies, and radiological instrumentation. And as a result of this information, the general public spontaneously built home shelters for their own protection. Now, 30 years later, we hear a different story. We're told that there is no nuclear threat. The Soviets are our friends and communism is dead. Our president no longer alerts us to potential nuclear crises. We must ferret this information out for ourselves from tiny articles hidden in the back pages of our newspapers. Last spring, I stumbled onto an article in the newspaper with the following headline, quote, "World close to nuclear war in 1990," unquote. The article gave details of a showdown between India and Pakistan. The information was dated March of 1993, but the showdown had occurred 3 years earlier in 1990. And it said that key intelligence officials turned the showdown, quote, "the most dangerous nuclear confrontation of the post-war era," unquote. More dangerous than the Cuban crisis. They waited 3 years to give us this information, and I asked, don't you think if the general public were told the truth about a current crisis, that they would again spontaneously take action to protect themselves against a nuclear threat and build bomb shelters in their own backyards? And his answer was, quote, "If we informed the public at the time of the crisis, it would be too late for them to do anything about it." So I asked Mr. Aspin, don't you think, in view of the fact that you have acknowledged a number of nuclear crises that threaten the United States, that if the public knew of these threats, they would not only tolerate but demand from the government the building of public shelters and missile defense? And he skirted the question entirely, and hoping, I think, to make me look like a hypocrite, he said, "Do you have a bomb shelter at your house?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Now people, he said, "if you don't presently have a bomb shelter, don't go out and build one. It's just a waste of money and you don't need one." And again, referring to the comment Paul made, I said, "You and the other bureaucrats in Washington have hardened bomb shelters that we built for you with our tax dollars. Why do you need a bomb shelter and we don't?" At that point, there was obvious whispering on the stage by Mayor Wilson to those in charge of the meeting, and on that note, without a response to my question, Mr. Aspin thanked the meeting. Mr. Aspin was thanked, and the meeting was adjourned. And this took place in a very large hall. And after the meeting, people kind of separated, and quite a few of them came over to Paul and I, and quite a few of them went over to Les Aspin, and we fielded their questions. But we left before the reception. However, the next day, members of the program committee called me and told me that Les Aspin had purposefully come up to them and wanted to know who was that woman, what is her name, what is her address, and what is her telephone number. And now I'm on some kind of a list, I guess. I was somewhat surprised at Mr. Aspin's remarks, and later made it a point to research some of the written material on national security policy. And Paul, I think there's a couple of more overlays on this you might turn on. In March of 1993, Les Aspin, as Secretary of Defense, initiated a comprehensive review of the nation's defense strategy. It was called the Bottom-Up Review, and I don't know if any of you have seen that or read it, but it is available to us upon request. And I've recently read this report, and in view of his opening remarks at the University of Utah, it was quite a curiosity to see acknowledged and written in his own report that, now this is what he says now in his own report, quote, "Moscow still controls tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, a factor to be reckoned with should anti-Western elements take control of the Russian government. Even after START II is ratified and implemented, Russia will maintain a formidable nuclear arsenal of 3,000 to 3,500 deliverable weapons. Moreover, several thousand strategic nuclear weapons from the former Soviet arsenal lie outside Russia. Although the leaders of the Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus have pledged to eliminate the strategic nuclear arsenals on their territories, the disposition of these weapons remains uncertain. Increasing political and social disorder in these newly independent states could heighten the risk that nuclear weapons might be used accidentally in an unauthorized manner or could fall into the hands of terrorist groups or nations," unquote. Now that's not quite what he told us, is it, earlier in that talk? What kind of hypocrisy is this? That among themselves they would acknowledge the ongoing nuclear threat from Russia, But when speaking to the general public, they lie and deny the existence of this threat, even though it is written in their own policy reports. If you remember at first, he said, the evil empire is gone. That's what he told the students. The end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union took care of the global nuclear threat. Defense of the continental United States, even in the face of the acknowledged Russian nuclear threat, is not a consideration with this administration. I reference remarks made by Mr. Aspin at the AUSA convention on October 18, 1993, and this was the very same month that he wrote this bottoms-up review where he acknowledges the Russian threat. In his opening remarks, he confirmed again that the Soviet threat was gone. He said, quote, "The Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is gone, and things are quiet again. In short, the new Army will have 3 key missions. 1, to maintain a strong U.S. military presence overseas. 2, to respond to, fight, and win major regional conflicts. And 3, to conduct peace operations, that is peacekeeping and peace enforcement." He's stressing, of course, regional conflicts, things outside of the United States. He said, quote, "We'll want to train with the forces of other nations. Today's Army must be able to respond to crises anywhere in the world." Now, here we're going to meet, how are we going to meet these demands? First, see the enemy before he sees you. Second principle, shoot the enemy before he shoots you, unquote. Now that sounds like first strike doctrine to me. Interesting concepts for someone who has supported and proposed demilitarization and a reduced military budget. In remarks given to the U.S. Marine Corps Symposium, September 27, 1993, Mr. Aspin said, quote, "The United States must and shall remain a world power in this era. We did this review from the bottom up in order to take account of the dramatic changes in the world." He's telling the Marine Corps now. "The Soviet threat is gone," he says. "So we needed to ask ourselves basic questions starting with this. 1, what do we need a defense for? When it comes to force planning, the most important part of our military strategy is the need to be able to fight and win major regional conflicts," unquote. "We've designed our force to fight and win 2 nearly simultaneous major regional conflicts. 2, force enhancement areas are particularly critical. We need to deliver our forces to distant battles areas and sustain them there. Preposition our Army heavy brigade equipment set ashore overseas. We must sacrifice defense at home to support world regional conflicts." It's interesting to note that in February of '94, General E.C. Meyer released a report to the Pentagon. This study was appointed by former Defense Secretary Les Aspin and given the task of helping the Pentagon judge the military's readiness to enter combat and conduct other missions. And this is what General Meyer said. General Meyer said the military is plagued by, quote, "pockets of unreadiness," unquote, caused by, quote, "budget cuts, base closures, and severe troop reductions that could make it difficult to fight 2 major wars. For example," he cited, quote, "spare part problems in the Air Force, Army personnel mismatches caused by the rapid drawdown of forces, and a high rate of operations that detract from the Marine Corps' training abilities," unquote. In a report to the Pentagon last October '94, Senator John Glenn, Democrat, Ohio, said he is concerned that cuts, quote, "may become the seed for the next crises," unquote. The ranking Republican on the committee, Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, said, quote, "Defense has been cut past the fat into the bone," unquote. And our new Secretary of Defense, William Perry, at his confirmation hearing, told the Senate committee on October 12, 1994 that, quote, "Historically, we have not managed well such budget declines. This time we must get it right, or we will pay the cost later, either in blood or treasure or both," unquote. You may all have read with relief the headlines of the New York Times. Just last month, they reported concerning our budget, military is commanding more money in new budget. Now let's not take too much heart, however. The budget, which begins in October 1995, came back at about $7 billion more than President Clinton and the Pentagon had asked for. However, according to this report, the budget still continues to decline and is 1.7% less than it was this year. The administration's budget called for cutting the Army's divisions from 14 to 10, Air Force wings from 28 to 20, and aircraft carriers from 13 to 12 by 1999. So even with Dr. Perry's good intentions, the budget continues to decline, but the rate of decline is slowing. Let us hope that our new Congress will continue with the great efforts they have shown thus far. Mr. Aspin gave the following report to the Air Force in September 15, 93. He discussed what drove the policy in his bottom-up report and concluded that, quote, "Our force structure is too large and our modernization program is too big. We didn't need as many aircraft for the future as we did when we faced the Soviet threat. I wonder if the Air Force, if the Marine Corps, the Army, or the Senate committees ever read what was really in that bottom-up report concerning the actual Russian threat. Do they ever read the newspapers? We found this not too long ago in the newspaper. Dead hand nukes live on in Russia. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but it says, according to U.S. expert on nuclear command systems, the Soviet military built and operated a guaranteed system for retaliating against the United States nuclear attack without direct human involvement that could still be used today. This dead hand system, if activated by Russian military leaders, would automatically launch hundreds of nuclear warheads toward the United States if its sensors were triggered. The really bad news for all of us in the United States is that this dead hand system may be prone to errors and could be activated without the benefit of an attack from the United States. Events such as an earthquake in Russia or some kind of nuclear exchange between the republics in the former Soviet Union could set off the system and send hundreds of warheads on their way toward the United States. The new post-Cold War military policy has taken form. It is apparent that much of this current policy is driven by international institutions such as the United Nations. And with our continued demilitarization, I fear for our very sovereignty. Is President Clinton looking for what's best for the United States, or is he looking to become a force in the United States of the world? I believe Les Aspin was a politician who told only what would sway the American public to their will. I tend to agree with Lawrence Korb, the Assistant Secretary of Defense in Reagan's administration, quote, "Aspin never made the transition from legislator to political executive," unquote. Now, I hate to report a huge problem without proposing some solutions, and this is very humbly proposed as a member of the private sector. But I think the first priority of the military budget should be in developing defenses for the general public. I think most of us here today would agree that we need to develop a civil defense program and we need to develop a missile defense program. We should use our military and our wonderful intelligence capability to protect our own borders and help stop the influx of drugs in our own country. We have seen that this administration puts great emphasis on our participation in regional conflicts. Terrorism on U.S. soil is almost certainly to be associated with our involvement in foreign conflicts and our preeminence in world affairs. I believe we should demand an objective assessment of the actual dangers to our national security, and we should commit troops only when there are compelling national interests involved. Now, this may seem like an oversimplification. There are many things involved in leaving regional conflicts. And of course, we look at the oil concerns that we have. Well, how about using some of our research money to develop alternate energy sources? How about taking our nuclear power plants and cookie cutter plants that are all exactly the same, and being able to use these power plants for our electricity, as well as using it for a hydrogen economy and lessening our need for foreign oil. We should stop financially supporting the democracy of other countries. The billions of dollars we are giving to Russia is being used against our interests. Russia gives millions of dollars to Cuba to spy on us, and they supply the Serbs as they did Iran. They continue to develop and modernize their own strategic nuclear, chemical, and biological capabilities. We just recently saw in the James catalog that they reported a new torpedo that Russia had developed that had a velocity of 200 knots. Now, our torpedoes have a velocity reported of 40 knots. That's about 5 times the velocity of our torpedoes. We should be especially concerned when we consider what emphasis we put on the sea leg of our triad. At this point, we don't have a lot of faith that the government is going to provide NBC protection for the general public. We would like to report that we continue to have good success in Utah with our civil defense organization. We currently have 12 shelters in varying stages of development. We hope to have most of those buried by the end of September. We appreciate so much the support that the DDP continues to give us. We appreciate the shelter display. We have touched literally thousands of people with this display, teaching them weapons effects and survival skills. We have many, many shelters in place. We have built these shelters and we have made mistakes, but hopefully we're correcting the mistakes as we build them. We hope if you're building shelters that you will call us and we can give you the benefit of our experience. Many of you, some of you have bought the book outside on sheltering concepts. We now have a new rendition, and we made this from my thesis. We have we have one chapter on national security concerns, we have another chapter on weapons effects, another on sheltering concepts, and another on post-war survival. So if you have bought this book that was out here, please write to me and I'll send you the new book. In closing, I would like to say that I'm excited and hopeful that under our new Congress we'll continue to see change for the better. We are definitely slowing our rate of decline, but we must tenaciously take an active role in our political system and make our voices heard in the public forums. So if you have any questions concerning our interview with Mr. Aspin, or any comments, or any questions concerning our civil defense organization, we would be happy to field them. Yes?
If the National Health Care Program had gone through, I'm sure that your phone number and address would be on your file along with the rest of the information.
That's probably so, yes.
Trying to look at the display of Les Aspin's comments that you've given us, for which I'd like to thank you, I'm sure, on behalf of all of us, and trying to look at it dispassionately, it looks to me as if there's preemptive surrender to the Soviets. We're playing possum. The Soviet Empire has disintegrated, and yet they have all these missiles. And Les Aspin was clearly lying to you, as he clearly is lying. He must have a reason. He was not a fool. And strikes me this is preemptive surrender. I hope I'm wrong. I'd like to hear your comments.
Well, I am sorry to say that I agree with you. I feel that the money, the billions of dollars that we are giving to Russia, is extortion. I fear that it is extortion.
Tribute.
And I hope that we'll be able to have the strength to tell them that we no longer want to fund the things that they're doing. They're funding, with that money, they're funding a lot of things that we don't agree with. Thank you. Yes?
What is your address?
You want my book or my bomb shelter?
Where should we write?
Okay, please write to Sharon Packer, 1950 East, Forest Creek Lane, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84121. And if you'd like to call me, my number is 801-942-5638. 801-942-5638. And Paul's number is 801-208 what? 8303.
280.
280-8303. Any other questions? 801-280-8303, and the zip code on my address was 84121. Yes?
Sharon, is that phone number of yours the one that's been tapped?
Yes, that's the tapped phone. So if you want to call me from a payphone and only give me your first name. Yes?
It just struck me that there's something very similar, with, believe it or not, between your presentation and Dr. Duesberg's similarity. And that is that here's the inescapable logic of a very straightforward argument. And yet, countless people who are supposedly intelligent resist it, can't see any merit to it. And I wonder if it's an aspect of human nature that's operating here, kind of, it doesn't matter who wins or loses, it's where you place your blame kind of thing, where people are afraid they don't have enough of a commitment to logic, or somehow they allow their emotions or their fears of being blamed or whatever it is. They will not face up to translating theory or mental processes into the factual implications if it doesn't suit them psychologically. And if that's the case, then I don't know, maybe all these problems are trying to solve, maybe they're bigger than we think they are.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. And nuclear war becomes the unthinkable because the Physicians for Social Responsibility have for so long made nuclear war appear to be totally unsurvivable. And so if we can't do something about it, then we're not going to think about it. It's like getting on a plane. I go to sleep the minute I get on the plane before it ever takes off because I know if it goes down, there's nothing I can do. But if there's something I can do, I'll worry it to death. And continually when we speak, we have people ask or comment, I'm going to be the first one to stand underneath it. It really sounds macho. And then we tell them, well, you have been taught one thing. We're survivors. We've been taught to survive. You've been taught to lie down and die. And that's what they have been taught. Our children and our adults as well are taught to lie down and die. There's nothing you can do about this. But there is the weapons effects. All of these things we can overcome with some very simple technology. And we're putting these bomb shelters in the ground 8 foot by 40 foot for $8,000. That includes the backhoe, the crane, all of the fill, a 40-foot long corrugated steel shelter, the ends, the entrances, the blast doors, the blast valves, the floors, the battery system. And $8,000, that's the price of a used boat or a motorcycle. And it's very simple. And Ed York has worked with us very carefully, as well as Dr. Robinson and a number of the doctors, Dr. Chester and Carrie, and a number of the people here. And they've assured us that our designs on these entrances, they've told us how to design them and how to attenuate the radiation, all forms of the radiation, and it can be done very simply. I go to the fourth graders all the time and teach for a day and teach them about this, and they're excited, and they write me letters and say how excited they were. They're not horrified and terrified. They're really excited about the possibility of surviving. And so it can be done, but it's up to us to do shelters ourselves and then show people that it can be done, because Paul and I did it first, and from there it's grown, and we literally have hundreds of shelters in Utah. Many of them hardened, well over 150, 175 hardened shelters, and probably thousands of basement shelters that are radiation shelters. Paul, do you have any comment about that?
I know y'all want to get up and stretch, so this will be real brief, but I've just been informed that next year they're going to hold a DDP meeting in Salt Lake City, and we kind of like to get a show of hands of how many individuals in here would like to take a tour of some good shelters that have been built. That's a bunch. Okay, we will make some arrangements with some of the local citizens in Salt Lake and get them to open up their facilities for a tour, and I'm sure they'll be happy to do it.
Let's put in a great big shelter for us.
Yeah. Did you want to tell them about the... we have a... Have we told you about our visit to the local EOC with the sheriff's office? You might want to tell
We had
them.
another question here first.
Oh.
Maybe we'd like
To comment that might be of some interest to some of the people here. I attended a civil defense, a one-day meeting in Los Angeles several years ago, partly on bomb shelters. One of the speakers was Peter Beckman. And during the course of the meeting, he was asked if he had a bomb shelter in his Colorado home. And somewhat to my surprise, he said no. Just people here are just interested in him, so I thought I'd throw that in.
Well, I think the older we get, maybe we think we're not worth saving, but he was, and he should have had one. Paul, tell him about the EOC.
This will take a couple minutes. We have a chapter of civil defense volunteers in Logan, Utah, and they just bonded for $5 million to build a brand new emergency operations center, which was supposed to have a protection factor of 100. We're getting protection factors of 10,000 with our shelters, and they're getting a protection factor of 100 with $5 million. Anyway, as the tour group was proceeding through the facility, the sheriff was explaining the pristine locker rooms and the storage rooms and the decontamination showers and the $1 million satellite communications room. And one of the women in the tour asked if, she said, well, this is wonderful. If there was a nuclear attack, I could bring my family here. And Sharon responded, oh, no, you can't. No, that's not for you.
Could we stop the other conversation, please, so we can hear the speaker? Would you repeat the last minute or so, please?
Well, one of the mothers who was taking the tour asked if she could bring her family here. And Sharon explained that this was only for the bureaucrats, and that this was not intended for the civilian population. And she said, well, do you suppose he would tell me that if I asked him? She said, well, ask him. So she asked the question directly to the sheriff, and the sheriff said, oh, no, ma'am, this is not for you. Don't come here. This is just for the sheriff's office and the county officials. And one of the gentlemen there named Willie, I hope you get to meet him, he's very interesting. He said, well, just what is it that you people in here with all this stuff are going to be doing for us out there? And the sheriff said, well, nothing. So it was a real eye-opening tour. Anyway, we hope to see you all in Salt Lake. Thank you.